Let your breathing slow. Let the quiet return. Tonight is not about panic or survival. It is about the strange stillness of the moments we barely made it through. Moments when civilization teetered on the edge and the world forgot how to behave like itself. This story begins with the sound no one heard. April 1815. Half a world away from most of the world's great cities, on the island of Sumbawa, in what is now Indonesia, the mountain called Tambora exploded. It wasn't just a volcano. It was the largest eruption in recorded human history, louder than Krakatoa, stronger than Vesuvius. The peak of the mountain vanished overnight. Ash rose into the sky, not for minutes, but for days, climbing higher than commercial planes fly now. But few people in Europe or the Americas knew what had happened. Not yet. And that's when the quiet began. By the following year, the ash from Tambora had wrapped around the earth like a veil, a gray shawl draped across the sky. It scattered sunlight, it cooled oceans, it shifted winds, and it changed everything. The year was 1816. In New England, it began to snow in June. In China, rice paddies froze. In Switzerland, summer simply never came. They called it the year without a summer. Frost formed in July. Crops failed across Europe. People watched their food rot on the vine or never grow at all. Horses died, and without them, grain transport stopped. Grain prices tripled. In Ireland, famine spread like fog. In parts of India, monsoons failed completely, followed by cholera. But it wasn't just food that vanished. It was light. People wrote about skies that looked like polished steel. No clouds, no sun. Just a dull, oppressive brightness that cast no warmth. The trees didn't know when to bloom. Birds migrated in circles. Cows produced blood instead of milk, at least according to terrified farmers who didn't understand what they were seeing. In the cold gloom, something else spread. Fear. Religious groups predicted the end of the world. Some believed the sun had burned out. Others thought God had abandoned the earth. In Geneva, a small group of writers, trapped indoors by the freezing rain, invented stories to pass the time. One of them, a teenager named Mary, had a nightmare about a scientist building a man out of corpses. Out of the darkness of 1816 came Frankenstein, and elsewhere, revolutions quietly shifted. Famine and unrest led to riots, migrations, and strange new ideologies. Families broke apart. Empires weakened. And all because one mountain on one island had decided to scream. If you close your eyes now, you can almost hear it. Not the explosion, but what came after. The soft sound of crops failing. The silence of birds who forgot to return. The thin cough of a hungry child. The long stillness of a summer that never arrived. And yet we survived. But barely. The ash settled. The skies brightened. The seasons grudgingly remembered themselves, but something in us had changed. A reminder had passed through history like a cold wind, that we are never far from the edge, that something as quiet as dust in the stratosphere can remake the world, that survival sometimes is not a triumph, but an accident. The strange thing is how this disaster, enormous as it was, slid out of the cultural memory. Tambora is rarely mentioned in schools, rarely dramatized in film, and yet it affected more people than most wars. It rewrote maps, not of land, but of fear, because it reminded us nature doesn't care if we're ready. In New England, people slaughtered their last animals, fearing they wouldn't survive the next failed harvest. In London, scientists began debating the idea of climate as a weapon, not deliberately, but as a thing that could destroy regardless of our choices. New religious sects formed, trying to make sense of this sudden collapse of seasons. Farmers gathered around preachers who claimed the cold was punishment, that the sun had withdrawn to judge us. But others quietly began to understand something deeper, that we depend on a balance so fragile, even a single mountain can topple it. It's easy to think of history in terms of human events, wars, treaties, discoveries. But sometimes the real turning points are invisible. A few particles of ash, a few degrees of temperature, a sudden frost that steals the wheat before it can be cut. In parts of China, famine gave way to migration. Villages emptied. In Ireland, the food shortages of 1816 were a precursor to greater famines to come. In Bengal, entire families vanished from the record. And yet humanity moved forward, hungry but breathing. There's a strange peace in looking back at the near disasters we survived, a kind of backward gratitude, not because we triumphed, but because we didn't vanish. So now breathe again. Let your thoughts drift. Let the cold fog of that strange summer melt in your imagination. Hear the silence of snow falling where it should not. Taste the smoke of a fire built too early, too often. And remember, it didn't take a war. It didn't take a virus. Just a mountain, just fire and ash and sky. And the world almost changed forever. That was only one thread. There are others. Because danger isn't always a volcano. Sometimes it's a decision. And sometimes it's a single man staring at a blinking screen, deciding whether or not to press a button. And we'll go there. Next. Let the silence settle again. This story is colder, not just in temperature, but in tension. No fire, no ash this time. Only a room, a screen, and a choice that could have ended everything. September 26, 1983. The Cold War is in full swing. The world is split between two colossal powers, the United States and the Soviet Union. For decades, both sides have built up arsenals of nuclear weapons capable of ending civilization many times over. The logic was simple, if terrifying. Mutual destruction would prevent either side from striking first. But the system wasn't perfect. It relied not just on machines, but on people, fallible, frightened people. On that night in 1983, in a Soviet bunker south of Moscow, one man was on duty, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov. He sat before a control panel, watching for signs of incoming missile launches from the United States. Around him, blinking lights, humming machines, and a tension thick enough to feel in the air. Then it happened. An alarm, a warning. The system reported a missile had been launched from the U.S. toward the Soviet Union. Petrov froze. Then, more alarms. 2 missiles, 3, then 5. The protocol was clear. Report it up the chain, trigger a counterattack. Respond before it's too late, but something didn't feel right. Petrov wasn't sure. The alert system was new, recently installed, untested in real conditions. And the logic bothered him. If the U.S. were launching a real attack, why only 5 missiles? Why not the hundreds they were capable of? He made a choice. He didn't report it. He waited. Minutes passed. No explosions. No impact. The screen returned to normal. It had been a false alarm. Sunlight bouncing off high-altitude clouds, misread by the satellite system. But the protocol didn't account for doubt. It didn't leave room for hesitation. If Petrov had followed orders, we wouldn't be here. The world would have gone up in smoke, ash, and flame. Cities erased. Millions gone in minutes. All because of a reflection in the sky. And all because one man chose not to trust the machine. Let that settle in. Not every near extinction comes with explosions. Some arrive in silence, inside rooms full of blinking lights, where decisions are made in seconds. Stanislav Petrov didn't consider himself a hero. He was reprimanded afterward, criticized for not properly documenting the event. He lived in obscurity for years. But that night, the thread of civilization held barely. And yet, the system remained fragile. Even now, protocols for nuclear response often give only a few minutes of decision time. Systems can still be fooled by weather, by glitches, by human error. The terrifying part? Petrov wasn't trained to override. He wasn't supposed to disobey. But instinct, a soft, quiet doubt, saved the world. And we nearly lost it all. Not to malice, not to war, but to a misread cloud and a blinking screen. The Cold War has ended, but the weapons remain. Thousands of them, still ready, still waiting. Some under newer systems, others under protocols unchanged since the 1980s. The story of Stanislav Petrov reminds us how little separates safety from catastrophe. How we've built systems so complex, we sometimes forget they depend on people, and those people can be scared, tired, wrong. But sometimes they can also be calm, and calm saved us. So now, breathe. Listen. Imagine the soft humming of that control room, the blinking light that almost started the end, the quiet, lonely courage of one man who chose to wait. That moment is behind us now, but only just, because every age has its own version of that blinking light. Every generation faces its own test, and sometimes we pass it not with strength, but with silence. Next, we go back further, to a time before pandemic was a common word, before safety protocols were written, when one locked door failing could have changed everything. Because our last story isn't about explosions or alarms. It's about something even more invisible. A virus, a lab, a nearly forgotten breach, and how close we came once again to the end. Let the noise fade again. No missiles, no mushroom clouds. Just a sterile hallway, pale lights overhead, the hum of refrigeration units, a clipboard left on a steel table, forgotten, and behind a locked steel door, something alive, waiting. This was the 1970s, deep in the era of the Cold War. The world was divided and tense, and both sides were racing to develop weapons not only of mass destruction, but of mass infection. Bioweapons, invisible, silent, and terrifying. While the nuclear arms race captured headlines, this race, the race for viral supremacy, happened mostly in shadow. In a quiet corner of the Soviet Union, in a top-secret facility known only to a few, one such experiment was underway. The lab was called Vector, and it housed some of the deadliest pathogens known to humanity: anthrax, smallpox, Ebola, and among them, a strain of the Marburg virus, a cousin to Ebola, which causes hemorrhagic fever and has no cure. It wasn't supposed to get out. The protocols were in place: thick gloves, triple-sealed suits, multiple decontamination chambers. But as history often reminds us, protocols are only as strong as the people who followed them. One technician, her name lost to the archive, was working with the virus. A vial cracked. Maybe it was a flaw in the glass. Maybe it slipped during transfer. Maybe it was fatigue. In a level 4 lab, even a droplet is a death sentence. She was exposed. She fell ill days later. Fever, vomiting, internal bleeding. The doctors didn't know what it was at first. Her colleagues kept working. No lockdown, no alarm. By the time they realized the truth, it was almost too late. Dozens had been in contact. Some showed symptoms. Others fled. The facility scrambled to contain what could have been the next global pandemic, not through public health systems, but behind closed doors. Eventually, the outbreak was sealed. Barely. Some died. Others survived. But the incident was never widely reported. It was buried, like so many errors of the Cold War. A mistake shelved under secrecy. But think about that for a moment. A virus engineered and studied for war, nearly slipping past its cage. Not in a movie, not in fiction, in real life. We often think of near extinction in terms of the dramatic, the bomb, the flood, the asteroid. But this was quieter, more intimate. A handful of people in suits, holding back a tide of microscopic death. And it wasn't the only time. Years later, in another Soviet lab, a smallpox outbreak occurred. The disease had been eradicated from the public, declared dead, but samples still existed in labs like these. A single breach infected several lab workers and caused one death. And again, it was kept quiet. The truth is, we are constantly brushing up against the edge of disaster, not because of malice, but because of curiosity, ambition, secrecy, because someone wanted to understand a virus better, because someone thought the lock would hold. In the 1970s, we didn't have mRNA vaccines. We didn't have real-time global data sharing. If the Marburg virus had escaped that lab fully, it could have spread through cities before we even knew its name. This is not to condemn science, but to remind us of its weight. of the razor-thin margin between discovery and disaster, of how knowledge in the wrong context can become a ticking clock. And even now, perhaps especially now, the systems we trust are still fragile. COVID-19 reminded us that a single mutation, a single exposure, can change the world. Entire cities shut down, borders closed, economies halted. But what if COVID had been more deadly? What if the virus from that 1970s lab had reached a city before it was stopped? Sleep on that question. Let your breath slow. Because as the hum of those laboratory refrigerators fades from your imagination and the locked steel door drifts out of view, remember, the scariest threats are not always the loudest. Sometimes they whisper, in petri dishes, in forgotten files, in moments where one misstep could be the end. The world didn't end that day in the lab, but it could have. And if we forget how close we came, we might not be so lucky next time. So now, let it go. Let the pressure release from your chest. The night is quiet again. The future uncertain, but tonight, just tonight, held together by silence and sleep. And yet, as you drift further into thought, consider this. Behind every lab door and containment seal lies the promise of both hope and horror. Discovery and disaster live side by side, each breath a balancing act between progress and peril. There's beauty in that fragility, in the way we walk that narrow bridge between what we can know and what we cannot control. So close your eyes, let the light fade. The refrigerator hum has stilled, the clipboards are filed. The door, this time, remains locked. Let sleep take you, gently, not in fear, but in awe of how easily everything we know could have vanished. And didn't, not yet, not tonight.